Can. Yes, brother.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everybody, and it's great that we are all together again. So this is the second of a series of talks on actually relating to karma, which I've extracted. To remember the four reliances, which is from the Abhisamaya Alankara. So when we listen to the Dhamma talk, we rely not on the person, but on the words that we hear. And likewise, it's not just on the words that we hear, but also on the meaning of what we have heard. Thirdly, we rely not just on the provisional meaning, but the definitive meaning of what we have heard. And fourth, but not least, most important, I think, is that whatever we have heard, so that we not just have an intellectual understanding, but also have a direct, non-conceptual experience. Which basically means that we then put into practice what we have heard. Okay, so for today, the talk is actually based on the Ambalaṭṭhikārāhulovāda Sutta, which is actually Sutta 61 in this middle length discourses of the Buddha, translation by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi. So those of you who have the opportunity to get hold of this book, I think it's a wonderful book. It's on page 523 to 526. So it's a fairly short discourse of the Buddha, but it is a very meaningful discourse. Now, in this discourse, there's also a parallel in the Chinese agamas. As some of you would know, we have the Pali Nikayas. We have a similar parallel in the early teachings, which is found in the Sarvastivada tradition. It's called the Agamas. So you have the Madhyama Agama. It's also called the Rahula Sutta. This is Sutta number 14. Okay. So likewise, you have another similar parallel in the Vinaya Vibhanga in another school called the Mula Sarvastivada, and you have it in both Chinese and Tibetan. Now, if you get a chance to read both of these discourses in the Agamas, as well as in the, like in the Vinaya Vibhanga, you find that the contents are actually very similar, very, very similar. The only difference is, like, for example, in the Ambalaṭṭhikārāhulovāda Sutta, the discourse is said to have taken place in Ambalaṭṭhika, or the mango stone, as Bhikkhu Thanissaro translated it. Whereas in the Agamas, it is said to be taken place in the Tabodharama hot springs, but both also in the Rajagaha. And the other difference is that while this discourse that we're going to discuss today took place in the evening, whereas in the Agamas, it's supposed to be in the morning. And in this discourse, you will find a word translated as the Blessed One, which refers to the Buddha. In the Chinese tradition, or in the Agamas, the Buddha is always referred to as the world-honored one. So these are some of the differences, but the main content is actually very similar. Okay, so if you get a chance to read there's an English translation now by Bhikkhu Analayo. Bhikkhu Analayo is one of the very well-known translators. Now, so today we will just focus on the Ambalaṭṭhikārāhulovāda Sutta, which is Sutta 61 in the Book of Middle Length Sayings. Okay, so I will speak for maybe about 30 minutes, and then or 35 minutes, and then we will have time for Q&A. Now, before we look at the discourse proper itself, I thought I'd just give you a very quick summary of what this discourse or sutta is all about. Now, if you had a chance to already read this sutta, which is not very long, it's only a total of 18 paragraphs, the theme is actually about the dangers of lying and the need for constant self-reflection. Okay? And the approach that the Buddha has taken in this short discourse is fairly simple, but very systematic, because the Buddha makes use of similes. In fact, we will go through this discourse, and you will realize that there are actually 3 similes mentioned here. The first simile is that of a water pot or of a water vessel. The second one is of a royal elephant. And the third one is of a mirror. So this is where, from the mirror, then you find that the Buddha talks about the need for us to also always reflect on what we do. Okay, so I think one of the key characteristics of practicing the Dhamma is that we are constantly reminded to reflect. And of course, to reflect wisely. Some of you have heard of this word called yoniso manasikara, which means to reflect, to have a wise attention. So we reflect. So in this discourse, we are also encouraged to cultivate this reflective mind by reflecting on whatever actions that we perform. And actions that we perform, if you recall in the last discourse, I mentioned that karma is actually manifested through 3 doors: through the body door, through the speech door, and through the mind door. Okay, so in this discourse, as later on we will see, the Buddha talks about we should reflect on our future action, whether it is through body, through speech, or through mind. We should also reflect on our present action, something that we are currently doing. So we should also reflect on our present action in terms of our bodily action, mental action, and our verbal action. And thirdly, the Buddha says we should also reflect what we did in the past, previously, through our body, through our speech, and through our mind. And of course, these 3 are where karma is created. So today we will not go into details on what constitutes what would be deemed as wholesome actions through the body, through speech and mind, or what is would be deemed as unwholesome actions through body, speech, and mind. We will discuss that in the subsequent sutta. I think it's the last sutta, if I'm not mistaken. It's called the Salayaka Sutta, right, where the Buddha talks about the 10 unwholesome actions through body, speech, and mind, as well as the 10 wholesome actions through body, speech, and mind. Okay, so that is basically just a brief overview of this discourse. So let's look at a little background about this discourse itself. Just as if you had listened to my talk last week, the character in the Abhaya Raja Kumara Sutta was this prince, Abhaya Raja Kumara. So in this discourse itself, the main character is actually Rahula. So Rahula was the Buddha's only son. He was born on the day his father left the world to seek awakening. So it is said that when the Buddha, after his enlightenment, when he came back to Kapilavatthu, Rahula, the son, approached him and asked for his inheritance. And at the age of 7, so the text or the teachings explain that when the Buddha came back, remember he undergone 6 years of search for enlightenment. So when he came back, the child would have been 7 or 6 or 7. Okay, so he was initiated into the order as a novice by Sariputta. There's obviously a story behind this, and if there's time, you can ask questions about why the Buddha gave this inheritance by ordaining him, right? And subsequently, there was also this rule that wherever a young child is to be ordained, he needs to seek his guardian or his parents' permission. So we will not have time to go into that. So we will move on straight to the discourse. Now, the other thing I thought I should also mention is that this discourse, the Ambalaṭṭhikārāhulovāda Sutta, is also listed as one of the 7 texts, 7 discourses, which Ashoka, King Ashoka, which I think you all know, who lived in the 3rd century BCE, he has actually inscribed this sutta onto the rock edicts. So they were altogether about 7 suttas. Okay. Now, I thought it's also important for you to know that this is not the only discourse that the Buddha gave his son, Rahula. There were easily 6 other suttas besides this one, which is in the book of Middle Length Sayings. But likewise, in the book of Middle Length Sayings, there's another pair of sutta, which is called the Chula-Rahulovāda Sutta, Sutta 147, and the Maha-Rahulovāda Sutta, which is the greater discourse on Rahula, Sutta 62. So if you read the suttas, occasionally there are many discourses which come in pairs. Like I believe for the next 2 sessions, we're going to look at a pair of suttas about karma. So the next week, we'll look at the lesser discourse on karma, called the Chula Karma Vibhanga Sutta. And subsequent to that, we'll look into what is called the greater discourse on karma, or the Maha Karma Vibhanga Sutta, complexities of karma. So as you can see on this slide here, so there are easily 4 other suttas found in the book of Gradual Sayings, book of Connected Discourses, and also in the Sutta Department. Okay, so you have accessed all my slides, so you know where to Google some of these suttas for your better understanding of it. Now, in this book of Middle Length Sayings itself, the discourse that the Buddha gave to Rahula, I would say, represents maybe the first aspects of the Buddha's teachings, if you understand this trilogy of morality, meditation, and wisdom, or sila, samadhi, and panya. So when Rahula was age 7, so the Buddha taught him the Ambalaṭṭhikārāhulovāda Sutta. And then when Rahula was a teenager, the Buddha taught him the Maha-Rahulovāda Sutta, and subsequently taught him the Chula-Rahulovāda Sutta at age 60. So I think the teachings also mentioned, the text mentioned that eventually Rahula also became enlightened. So as I mentioned early on in my summary, the sutta has got 3 parables, which is the water pot, which is the water vessel, the royal elephant, and the mirror. Buddha impresses on Rahula the importance of not lying, even in jest. Then Buddha teaches regarding the 3 doors of action, which is how we should wisely attend to each action. That means before the action takes place, during the action takes place, and after the deed has taken place. So the sutta begins, "Thus have I heard." So you know by now that the I there refers to Ananda. So this is what Ananda heard. So Ananda, through oral tradition, repeated what he heard from the Buddha. On one occasion, the Blessed One, which is the Buddha. So in the Pali tradition, we use the Blessed One. If you read the Agamas, the word is usually translated as the world-honored one. Okay, but both refers to the Buddha. So on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Rajagaha, in the bamboo grove, the squirrel's sanctuary. So this appears to be the same location where last week we discussed the Abhaya Raja Kumara Sutta. So it happens at the same place. Well, if you can see on the map there, so Ambalaṭṭhika is actually in Rajagaha. Rajagaha today is known as Rajgir. So if you've been to India, I think the state of Vihara in the northern part of the country. Okay. So Rahula was staying in Ambalaṭṭhika. Then when it was evening, the Buddha rose from meditation and went to meet Rahula. He saw the Buddha coming and made a seat ready and set out water for washing the feet. The Buddha then sat down and washed his feet. Rahula then paid homage to him and sat down at one side. Now, now the other thing I think I should just mention is that in my slides, I have slightly paraphrased what was the original translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So some of the words may slightly be changed. So please always refer to the original text, right, which is found in the book of Middle Length Sayings. Okay, so from this brief paragraph here, of this slide here, we find that we realize that it happened in the evening. But as I mentioned early on, in the Chinese version, in the Agamas, it was apparently in the morning. So the Buddha rose from meditation. That means after the Buddha's meditation, he went to meet Rahula. He saw the Buddha coming. That means Rahula saw the Buddha approaching, and Rahula made a seat ready and set up water for washing the feet. So it's a custom during that time when the teacher comes, you give him a pot of water, and then, for him to wash his feet. Now, what is interesting here, it's a very small matter, but it tells you a lot about the humility of the Buddha himself. Here you have the Buddha who sat down and washed his own feet. Sometimes you may have heard or you may have read about, some very senior monks in some Asian countries. The devotees would then, bring some water and then wash the feet of the monks. But here again, you have the Buddha himself washing his own feet. So that's the humility that the Buddha has. Anyway, Rahula sat down, paid homage to him, and sat down at one side. So again, typical Indian custom, as you can see in all the texts. When a teacher is giving teachings, you sit by one side. You sit at one side to listen to him. Okay? Now, so in para 3, if you look at my slides at the right at the bottom, I've also inserted the paragraph where my slide comes from. So then when you make reference to the text, the actual translation, the Bhikkhu Bodhi, then you'll be able to follow that easily. Okay, as I said, I paraphrase some of it so that it fits nicely into one slide. Okay, so the simile of the water pot. So the first simile the Buddha gave to teach Rahula was about water in a water pot. So having left a bit of water on the water pot, that means after the Buddha has used the water in the pot to wash his feet, so there's still some water left. Then the Buddha asked Rahula if he sees the little bit of water remaining in the pot. Then Rahula must have taken a peep into the water vessel and said, yeah, of course. There is some little water left. And with that, the Buddha says, well, a spiritual life is very little. Someone tells a deliberate lie. Okay? Now the second one. Then, having thrown away the remaining bit of water in the pot. Remember the first pot? There's some water left over. So the second simile, the Buddha threw away all the water in the pot. Then the Buddha asked Rahula if he sees the water being tossed away, being thrown away from the pot. Then Rahula said, yes, Master, I see you throwing the water away from the pot. Then the Buddha explained. He said that for someone who tells a deliberate lie, there is no more spiritual life left in him, as he has thrown it all away. Okay? So in the text, I think it's translated as the reclusive life. I think in Pali it's the samana, the ascetic life. So I've just used the word spiritual life. Okay? So there is no more spiritual life left in him as he has thrown it all away. So the first simile, there's some water left. So this simile, there's no more water left. So it's like you've thrown away the water, you've thrown away your spiritual life. So let's say the third simile. Para 5, the Buddha then asked Rahula if he sees the water pot turned upside down. So there's no more water in the pot, so the Buddha turned the water vessel upside down. When Rahula said, yes, Blessed One, I can see that you have turned the pot upside down. Then the Buddha explained that if someone tells a deliberate lie without any shame, his spiritual life is turned upside down, just like the pot that is overturned. Okay, so here, again, you see this word, deliberate lie without any shame. Okay, now what is a deliberate lie? Okay, so maybe let me pause a little bit. Now, I suppose there are different ways of explaining what is meant by a deliberate lie. But there's a text in the Vinaya, for example, when the Buddha was telling the monks what constitutes a deliberate lie. And he gave the example, if you know before you speak that what you're going to say is a lie, that's a deliberate lie. If you know while you're speaking that what you're saying is not true, that's a deliberate lie. And if you know after you have finished speaking that what you said is not true, that is also defined as a deliberate lie. Okay, so there's one definition that the Buddha used to explain to the monastics. Okay, so one way you can use in today's context, you can use this word deliberate lie without any shame, is that when that speech is uttered, okay, it is uttered with a negative intention. You know it's a lie, and you utter it with a negative intention, with negative motivation. and not ashamed of it. I think there's a Pali word, it's called Laji, L-A-J-J-I, Laji. So you look up this Pali word, Laji, L-A-J-J-I. It means that you do something without any shame in it. Psychologists say that why do people lie? Psychologists say that basically there are two main reasons. Maybe there are more, but I remember there are two main reasons why. One is someone speaks a lie or utters a lie because of fear. And the other one is because of his own worldview. He thinks that, well, there's nothing wrong with speaking a lie. This is a dog-eat-dog world. This world is a mess. This world is such that, only the fittest survive. So if you want to get something true, you got to lie, you got to do whatever just to get it true. So because of that, you make the deliberate lie. And your worldview is that there's no shame to it. Okay, but that's not the Buddhist perspective. Okay, so that's paragraph 5. So that's the simile of the water pot. So just a little digression there. Okay. Now, para 6, then the Buddha turned the water pot right upside up again. Okay, so remember there's the 4th simile. The Buddha then asked if Rahula sees how empty and hollow that pot is. And when Rahula says yes, Buddha explains that if a recluse has no shame in telling a deliberate lie, spiritual life is empty and hollow in the same way. Okay, so these are the four similes about the water pot. So I've just put a summary here in the one slide. So the first simile, if you remember, Buddha talks about the pot has little water. When the pot has little water, because the Buddha has used early on the pot has more water, he was using it to wash his feet. So some water is left. So he used it to tell Rahula that, well, spiritual life is very little, just like the little water is there, very minimal. Okay, when all water is thrown away, it's as if you're throwing away your spiritual life. You're throwing away all the wholesomeness that you're trying to develop. And when a pot is turned upside down, it's like you have turned your spiritual life upside down, where you're prepared to speak a deliberate lie, even though you know it's a lie, you're not ashamed of it. You think, what's wrong with that? As long as I can get what I want. So your total worldview is turned upside down, no longer the spiritual worldview. And when the pot is empty, your spiritual life is empty and hollow. Okay, so that's a simile of the water pot. So the Buddha uses example to explain to Rahula. Now, the second simile is that of what is called the tusker elephant or the royal elephant. So here the Buddha uses the simile of a fighting elephant, which uses every part of his body, the tusk, the hind legs, the forelegs, the ear, and eventually even the trunk. All right, we will not stop at nothing in order to win the war. So the mahout or the rider will tell the elephant, charge, and the elephant will just do that. So Buddha uses this simile to tell Rahula that for anyone who feels no shame in telling a deliberate lie, there's no evil that he will not do. So here the simile of the elephant and the rider of the elephant, I think if you read the text itself, the simile of the royal elephant, you can see that the elephant has given up his life, like what the rider asked him to do. And just the elephant doesn't think of any consequences anymore. You just fight. Okay? So you just do whatever he thinks. You don't care about the consequences. So it's like someone, who would tell a lie, not bothering, not worried at all about the consequences. Right? And I think the analogy of the simile of the royal elephant, one analogy I find very, very useful is from Ajahn Brahmali, who from Australia, who says that the rider actually represents the defilements, whereas the elephant represents, that where you just do without thinking of the consequences. And you do that because of the defilements. Okay? So that's the second simile. So here the key word is, there's no evil that he will not do. So here the Buddha then told Rahula not to utter falsehood, even in jest or even as a joke. Now, the third simile is that of the mirror. Okay, so here the Buddha then asked Rahula, now, Rahula, what is the purpose of a mirror? And Rahula replied, Bhante, a mirror is used for reflection. So too, Rahula, an action with the body should be done after repeated reflection. An action by speech should be done after repeated reflection. An action by mind should be done after repeated reflection. So this is in para 8. So subsequent paragraphs, you will find a lot of repetition. So basically the Buddha starts with, let me show you one. So it's basically talking about the future action, the present action, and the past action. So remember, future action, present action, past action for the body, for the speech, for the mind. Okay, remember this is an oral tradition, so the Buddha has to be very precise. Okay, so a lot of repetition. So anyway, let's run through this. So para 9. Rahula, when you wish to do an action, so this is in the future, when you want to do an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Would this action that I wish to do with the body lead to my own affliction, lead to my own pain and suffering, or to the affliction, the pain and suffering of another person, or to the affliction of myself and others? That means not just myself, not just others, but myself and others. Is it wholesome? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? So you reflect, all right, something that you want to do with your body, bodily action. If it will lead to affliction for yourself, for others, or for both, then it is, from the Buddhist perspective, it is an unwholesome action. Sometimes we use the word unskillful action. In Pali, we say akusala, with painful results. Okay, so you should not do it. But when you reflect and you know that this bodily action that you're going to do will not lead to affliction to oneself, not to affliction to others, or to both, then it is a good action. It's a skillful action. It is a wholesome action. It is a kusala action, kusala karma, with pleasant results. You should do it. Okay, so this is on the body. That means for future action. So you reflect. This action that I'm going to do, is it going to lead to affliction for myself, for others, and for others? Then it is unwholesome. Because it is unwholesome, it is unpleasant. Because it's unpleasant, I should not do it. But if it's the reverse, I should do it. Okay? Will it lead to my own affliction? Will it lead to the affliction of others? Or will it lead to the affliction of both? Is it unwholesome? With painful consequences? With painful results? So you reflect. When you reflect and you know that the actions that you're doing now leads to affliction for yourself, for others, and for both, therefore it is, from the Buddhist perspective, it is not skillful, it is not wholesome, it is unwholesome, and the result will be painful. Because it is painful, you should stop doing that action. Remember, this is present action, so you should stop it. But when you reflect, and then you know that action that you're doing now did not lead to affliction for yourself. It doesn't lead to pain, doesn't lead to suffering for yourself, neither does it lead to others or to both, then it is a wholesome action. Because it is wholesome, it is pleasant. Therefore, you continue with this action. Then Buddha talks about past. What about a bodily action that you've done in the past? You've done previously. So the Buddha says, after you have done an action with your body, you should reflect. Did this action that I've done with the body lead to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both? Was it unwholesome? Was it unskillful? Has it got painful results? Has it got painful consequences? So likewise, you reflect. You reflect and knew that the action done led to affliction for yourself, for others, and both. It was an unwholesome action with painful results. So what should you do now? So this is slightly different. So the Buddha advised to Rahula is, you confess to a teacher or a wise person or wise friend, and then practice restraint for the future. So here you've done an action through the body, so you knew it was not a good action, so you should confess to a teacher or to a wise friend, a kalyana mitta, and then you practice restraint for the future. Now, this confession, okay, so it is something that is frequently mentioned to the monastics, but I think even for lay people, there's a lot that we can do. You have done something in the past that is not positive, you should always confess. Because when we do that, then we kind of let the negative flow out, and then we make that determination not to do that. In the Tibetan tradition, particularly in the Lamrim teaching, there is what is called the 4 opponent powers, or the 4 powers of purification, where you learn to, the first is the power of regret, so which is similar to confession. In others, yes, you have done an action, you acknowledge it, you know it was you knew that it was, or you know that it was a negative action, confess it, admitted it. And then the second one is the power of refuge. So then maybe you go to in front of a Buddha image, all right, whether at home or in the shrine, and then you say, oh, blessed one, oh, Bhante, I've done this action. Let me be strong so that I will not repeat this mistake again. So it's called the power of refuge, or sometimes translated the power of reliance. It's also a power of relying on the truth, all right, developing the right attitude. So power of regret, a confession, power of reliance, a refuge. The third one is a power of virtuous activity. That means you have done a negative action. So what you do is then you perform a lot of wholesome actions. Deliberately, you go ahead and maybe do dana or do service, the 10 wholesome actions. So you ensure that you are determined to perform virtuous activity. And the fourth one is you make this power of resolve. Power of resolve means you resolve that you will not repeat. So this is called, in Pali, adhitthana, determination. That means making that very strong determination. Or effort, making the right effort, the 4 right efforts. Samma vayama, okay? So in the Tibetan tradition, they like to talk a lot of reference to what is called the 4 powers of purification, or the 4 opponent powers, which I think are very, very helpful, for us to practice restraint and so on. Okay, so that's part of it. Then the last part of para 11, the Buddha then says, when you reflected and knew the action done did not lead to affliction for oneself, or to others, or both, then it is a wholesome action with pleasant results. So you have done wholesome actions, you have done skillful actions in the past. So then you reflect, okay? For example, you have done dana, giving, dana again does not only mean giving food to monks. You've done a lot of good deeds. So you reflect on the good things that you've done, and you feel happy. Maybe before you retire to bed, you do what is, for example, it's called Chaganusati. You got Buddha Nusati, like this morning that we did. We reflect on the 9 qualities of the Buddha. We do Dhamma-nusati, we reflect on the 6 qualities of the Dhamma. And, you also do the Sangha-nusati, you reflect on the 9 qualities of the Sangha. So likewise, you can also do Chaga-nusati. Like in others, you reflect on the good, the generosity that you have done, all right, the day, which is a good bodily action. So you feel happy and glad, all right? Happy, you see there are 2 different words here. In Pali, in fact, they got so many different words for these positive states. You have heard of piti, P-I-T-I. Piti is like joy, and then you have heard of pamoja, which is like gladness, and then you got sukha, which is like happiness, and so there's so many positive states of mind, all right, in Buddhist psychology, right? And then you also have somanasa, for example. So you abide happy and glad, and you continue to train on wholesome states. What are wholesome states? 10 wholesome actions, which we will delve in more greater details when we come to the Saleyaka Sutta, right? Okay, let me go on since time is factor here. Yeah. So now the future verbal actions. So if you remember the past bodily action, all right. So now we're going to go to the future. So it starts with future verbal action. So it's the same. Rahula, when you wish to do an action by speech, all right, the previous slides were about body. So now this is speech. So you should reflect upon that same verbal action. This action that I wish to do, my speech lead to my own affliction, and so on and so on. So I will just skip some of this part. So when you reflect and know that the verbal action will lead to affliction for yourself, so that is unwholesome. In other words, if you know that something that you're going to say will lead to unhappiness, affliction, pain, or suffering to yourself, to others, and to both, then from a Buddhist perspective, it's unwholesome. So you should refrain from it, you should not do it. And the converse happens. So that's future verbal action. And then present verbal action. So while you're doing an action, in other words, now you're saying something, you should reflect. What I'm saying now, would what I say lead to suffering, lead to pain, lead to affliction of others? If it is so, I should stop. I should not continue. Right? So this is only possible if, for example, if we had practiced mindfulness, isn't it? All right, we are mindful with our speech. All right, if we are very mindful with our speech, sometimes even in the midst of saying something, we are able to pause. We're able to say, okay, maybe I should not go on. Right? Or very quickly, we know how to change what we are saying to something else. All right, so that we don't continue with this present action, verbal action, which is not skillful. Okay, so that's para 13. And of course, the same applies. So if the present verbal action is not skillful, suspend it. But if it's skillful, continue. All right, because the result will be wholesome. And past verbal action. So you have said something to someone, or you have said something to your boss, you have said something to your wife, to your spouse. So reflect on that. After you have done it, okay, was it an unwholesome act? Was it unskillful? If it was unskillful, all right, then you confess. Just admit to a friend, yesterday I mentioned this, I'm actually sorry about that. I should not have said it, And then you practice restraint for the future. So just as bodily action, you confess. So likewise for verbal action, you also confess to a teacher or to a wise friend. Okay? But when you reflected and you knew, it did not lead to reflection, that's fine. Continue with that. Okay? Now, the last one is mental action. So when you wish to do an action by mind, when you're about to think of, when you're thinking about something with this, then immediately the thought arises. Will this thought of mine leads to my own, or this thought unskillful? Would it be unskillful? Would it be skillful? If it is unskillful, it's going to lead to my pain and suffering. It's going to lead to the pain and suffering of others. And it's going to lead to the pain and suffering of both. So future mental action. You also reflect. Is it skillful? Is it not going to be skillful? So if it is not skillful, not wholesome, you should not continue with that thought. Okay? If it is skillful, okay, continue with that thought. That thought can then translate into speech, and that speech can then translate into body. Mind is a forerunner of all things, right? As the Dhamma-inspired tells us. So the mind is very important. So present mental action, likewise, while you are presently thinking of something, if you are mindful again, you know how to quickly change your thoughts. All right. In fact, in the Vitakka Santana Sutta, the Buddha talk about how do we overcome our distracting thoughts. There are 5 ways. Okay, we don't have time to go into that, but remember, if you need to read the discourse, it's called the Vitakka Santana Sutta. Discourse on how to counteract these distracting thoughts. It's also in the, if I'm not mistaken, also in the book of Middle Length. Okay, so present mental action. When you reflect and know the mental action leads to affliction for oneself, others, and both. Unwholesome, suspend such thoughts. And when you reflect and know the mental action does not lead to affliction of oneself, it is unwholesome action with pleasant result, you may continue with such actions. So past action. Now you have thought of something, you have had a negative thought, okay? maybe a thought of jealousy, a thought that you say you wish that, you know, this person that you really hated, you know, he would knock down by a 10-wheeler, and then, you know, he'll be crushed to death. So maybe it's such a negative thought. All right, so after you have that thought, you should reflect and say, did this action that I've done lead to my own affliction? Maybe not your affliction, but it lead to the affliction of others. And also lead to your affliction because you have negative thought. So it is an unskillful mental action. So what should you do? So you should then, when you reflect and knew that the past, it should be mental, not verbal, right? I think there was a typing error. Okay, so then you should do it. You should also refrain. Okay, practice restraint. So when you reflected and knew the action did not lead to affliction for oneself, all right, it was a wholesome action with pleasant results. You're pious and holy, so you continue on wholesome action. So you're happy about that. You're glad about that. Okay, so I think the earlier one there was a typo error. Should be past mental action, right? So this is a summary. So you reflect. Future, will this mental, verbal, bodily action cause harm to me and others? All right, this is in the future. Yes, don't do it. If no, then carry on. So you assess your present. Is this mental, verbal, bodily action causing harm to me and others? The present action. If yes, stop doing it. No, continue. And then you review, that means the past action. Did this mental, verbal, bodily action cause harm to me and others? Yes, don't do it again. But if no, then it is a wise action. Continue with it. All right? So you find it's simple advice, but very systematic, very methodical. All right? So finally, the last paragraph, the Buddha told Rahula, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past purified their bodily, verbal, and mental action, all did so by repeatedly reflecting thus. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will purify their bodily, verbal, and mental action will do so by repeatedly reflecting thus. And whatever recluses and Brahmins in the present are purifying their bodily, verbal, and mental action, all are doing so by repeatedly. So the purity of the three doors, the body door, the mind door, and the body door, the mind door, and the speech door. So these are the three where karma is created. So whatever actions that we do through any of these three doors, Buddha advises we should always reflect. And how do we learn to reflect this? We learn to do it through mindfulness, by cultivating mindfulness. Okay? So that's the last one. So in conclusion, therefore, Rahula, you should train thus. We will purify our bodily action, our verbal action, our mental action by repeatedly reflecting upon it. This is what the Blessed One said. And the Venerable Rahula was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Okay, so that concludes this short but very exciting and very meaningful sutta. So let me end with this prayer on the four sublime states. May I wish all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness and be without suffering. And may all sentient beings be equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much. And sorry I exceeded by 10 minutes. And we have about like 20 minutes for some Q&A. And if you have, please share your question. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters, if you have any questions for Brother Benny, please type it in the chat box and we'll read from there. So we have a question from Chiamsa. Can explain further what is hollow and empty spiritual life?
Okay. Well, an empty and hollow spiritual life would obviously mean that one does not practice in accordance with the Dhamma. For example, for lay people, we have the 5 precepts. We completely, overturn the 5 precepts. So we don't practice, we don't observe the 5 precepts. All right. So that's hollow and empty. And probably we also have a worldview that is not necessary to have this, to practice the five precepts. So we develop what is called wrong view. So when you have a negative action which is based on wrong view, then that action becomes even more serious. Again, this will be explained in the Saleyaka Sutta, where the Buddha talks about a person who commits a negative action, breaks, for example, the 5 precepts, he breaks all the 10 unwholesome acts, he commits all the 10 unwholesome actions, and not only that, he has wrong view. Okay, so views are very important in Buddhist teaching. For example, if you remember the Noble Eightfold Path, right at the start, we have got Samma Ditti, isn't it? Right view, the right thoughts. So a life that is hollow, that is empty, when we not only do negative actions, we not only break all the precepts and commit all the 10 unwholesome actions, we do not perform any merits. The Buddhist teachings, we said there are 3 bases of merits: dana, sila, bhavana. That means you do dana, you are generosity, you practice generosity, keep precepts, and you cultivate the mind. In other words, you transform, you convert, all right, so to speak, all your negative thoughts into positive thoughts. But you don't do any of these things, yet you have wrong views. So when you do that, your life is said to be hollow and empty. Okay.
There's a follow-up question. Differs from upside down spiritual life?
Well, I think all those 4 similes is basically telling us the progression. Like, for example, the Buddha start with one with very little water in the vessel, in the water vessel, in the water pot. So that means that someone, maybe he has been attending Dhamma talks. He realized the importance of doing good, but he does very little of good. Maybe he realized that okay, he will not harm human beings, but maybe he think, well, animals are fine. It's okay to kill animals. You go hunting, you go fishing, because those are animals. So partly because also of wrong views, but so he has some good, all right, but he also have a lot of negativity. Right? So that is when he has got some little water. So it's like very little of spiritual life left. So subsequently, isn't it? Remember the 4 slides that we have. So the Buddha is talking about the stages, where one literally give up the entire spiritual life, right? From very little water to when the Buddha used the simile of the vessel pot that's turned upside down, and then it's turned up again, upright, but it's hollow and empty, so completely gone. Whereas the first simile, or the simile of the first pot, is there's still some water. So there's still some goodness in that person. Okay? All right, so we can see it as a transgression. So what we should do is do the reverse. Okay? Do the reverse.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
You can type in your questions.
All right, we have another one. What is the difference between delusion and ignorance in Buddhism?
Yeah, well, both have got to do with not knowing. Okay, not having clear insight. You can put it in that way, but it's just that in the text they have got different words to describe this. I think the delusion is usually translated from the Pali word moha. And then ignorance is translated from the Pali word avijja. Okay, so delusion is always linked to, for example, greed, hatred, and delusion, right? Like our actions, our daily actions, what we are doing, we are not able to differentiate between what is right, what is wrong, what is wholesome, what is not wholesome. So that's one way of, say, a person is deluded, right? So the word moha in the context of greed and hatred, right? So greed and hatred. Whereas ignorance in the text, the Pali word is avijja. So avijja is always used in the context of the first link in the dependent origination. So which has got a much bigger ontological perspective in terms of, because of avijja pachaya sankhara, because of ignorance, it conditioned mental formations. Right? So it's a kind of a 12 links that dependent origination. But both have got these characteristics of not knowing. Right? So the opposite of ignorance is called vijja or jnana. Just like, for example, you have two different words. You got vijja, which is knowledge, and jnana, which is insight. Right? Like vipassana from the word vipassana, so jnana. So knowledge, wisdom, okay, or panya, panya. So jnana, okay. So another questions. What is the difference between an intentional life that is mindful and an intentional life without mindfulness? What is the difference between an intentional life that is mindful and an intentional life without mindfulness? I'm not sure. What is the difference between an intentional lie? Well, I suppose if you are mindful, you will not want to lie. Most of the time, sometimes we say something because we are not mindful, and then that happens to be a lie, happens to be not true. Okay, so intentional. So if you are mindful, then it kind of cut a lot of negative thoughts, negative speech, and negative actions in it. Right. So that's the purpose of mindfulness. And an intentional lie without mindfulness. Yeah. If there's no mindfulness, I think the probability of us lying is even higher.
Any more questions? Keep on coming.
Now, when we talk about intentions, sometimes we use the word motivation, right? So do we have the right intention, right motivation? Is our intention based on fear? Is our intention based on understanding? Is our intention based on compassion? So we can check that. We can check our mind.
Do we have any more questions? Please feel free to type in the chat box. We have one more question. Killing is bad karma. Disease and virus do have life. Is it a bad karma to get rid of them?
Well, killing is bad karma. Like, disease doesn't have life. Well, virus, the Buddhist definition of life is that it has got a mind and body. Okay, And mind, it has got the ability to, the four aspects of mind, right? So it has the ability to perceive, it has the ability to feel, it has the ability to, to have mental activities, it has consciousness, right? So these are four aspects of the mind. So from the Buddhist perspective, a virus doesn't have that, have those features, unlike, say, a sentient being. So from the Buddhist perspective, a sentient being will be like a human being. He has got a mind. A human being can think, can feel, can create thoughts, and have consciousness. Okay, an animal also has got these four mental concomitants, right, in the mind, and then he has got the body, right. So what constitutes a sentient being from the Buddhist perspective is a mind body, right? It has got a body, it has got four mental aspects to it. So from the Buddhist perspective, a virus wouldn't fall into that category. It could be living, but it doesn't have this four things. So is it bad karma to get rid of that? Yeah. So virus. So it is. Someone said that virus is not life. It is DNA. Bacteria may be alive. But again, from the Buddhist perspective, as I just mentioned, we don't see that as a life form. Say as a human being or as an animal or as a deva. So not in that sense, right? So it doesn't fall into the Buddhist category of life. So there's another question. At work, sometimes we tend to observe certain party committed speech to management which may affect others. Is it for us to do anything? Suddenly there are so many questions. Let me read that question again. So the question is, sometimes we tend to observe certain party committed speech to management. I think the question is what? Sometimes which may affect others. Are you saying that you ask a question or a certain party say something and then it affects others? Is it for us to do anything? Is that a question? Sometimes we tend to observe certain party committed speech to management. What do you mean by committed speech? Let me say something to management, is it? And by their action, it affects others. Is it for us to do anything? Well, if it affects you, then you have to clarify, isn't it? If it affects others and you do not know enough of it, just remain silent. But if it affects others and you also know about it and you are also involved in it, then I think you should also clarify. So without having malice, without having anger or hatred, you can always clarify from what you know. Okay, so whatever your colleague may be saying to management, if it affects others, including yourself, then I think you should not remain silent. You should always clarify, explain, and show your perspective without getting personal with that person. Okay? From the Buddhist perspective, is killing of white ants result in killing? Well, that is true. If you kill white ants, because from the Buddhist perspective, white ants, termites, they are living beings. So if you kill them, you are committing the first precept, or rather, you're breaking the first precept. Okay. So try to make sure that there are no white ants. If a person realizes that he has committed unwholesome action, what should he do? Well, as I said just now, the four I mentioned very briefly the four opponent powers in the Lamrim: power of regret, power of refuge, power of reliance, or virtuous activity, and power of resolve. So you have done something that is unwholesome mental action. You have thought about something unwholesome. It could be something mental. It could be something verbal. It could be something physical. So first thing is you have to admit that what you have done is unwholesome. Okay, and then the second one is you take refuge. You take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and tell yourself that and try to cultivate the right attitude that you will not want to do this again. And then the power of the virtuous activity is because you've done something unwholesome, then you create wholesome actions. All right. If it is an unwholesome mental actions, then you in your mind, how do you create wholesome mental actions? Maybe you reflect, you cultivate loving kindness for all sentient beings. So you practice metta, for example. You radiate loving kindness to all sentient beings. And then maybe you go to maybe a home or a hospice, and then you help out, or you go to the temple and help to clean the temple. All right. So you do something in reverse. So this is called the power of virtuous activity. And of course, finally, the power of resolve. You make a strong determination. You practice the 4 right efforts so that you know you will not repeat these unwholesome mental actions. Okay? So that is not so difficult to do. All right? But we got to make it habitual. So once this mental action of ours becomes habitual, then you can be quite sure that you can sustain it. Okay?
We have one last question. It's from YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
If a person realizes that he has committed an unwholesome mental action, what should he do?
Well, I've just answered that question. It's the question, if your person has committed,
I'm sorry.
if he has unwholesome mental actions, what should he do? I've just said that. Well, I've used an example which I find very useful from the Lamrim. It says that first, the power of regret. We have to regret that is what we have done is not right. Okay. Secondly, take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, or we confess to us to a Kalyana Mitta, to a spiritual friend. Thirdly, we engage in virtuous activity. We do wholesome actions. We see what the Buddha meant by sila, positive sila. In others, wholesome actions like what is the reverse of killing, what's the reverse of stealing, what's the reverse of sexual misconduct, what's the reverse of lying. So we do all the positive, wholesome actions. Okay. And the power of resolve, and we put in our mind that we will have this strong determination. We will practice the 4 right efforts found in the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so we can do that, not only just for mental actions, but also for verbal as well as spiritual. Okay, the last question, I think, maybe. If management requires to cause a spiritual speech for the benefit of the company, I think the question is, if management asks you to falsify or say something that is not true for the benefit of the company, this action is intentional. What is your thought? Well, it depends. What is it that the management asks you to do? For example, if you're an accountant and at the board meeting, the management or the CEO asks you to say that, actually we make a profit, we have made provisions. Actually, you did not make any provisions. Actually, we are making a loss. Then, of course, that's false. And you know that there is professional ethics, so you will not say that. So I think in such cases, you would have to very professionally tell your boss that, I'm sorry, I can't do this, because this is against my professional ethics. Right? You don't. If your company end up like, I'm not sure if you remember many years ago, Enron, you don't want your company to end up like Enron. All right. So I think in society or in management, if we have say a leadership position in particular, and I think this is particularly relevant to someone who has got a leadership position, isn't it? All right. Because if you are just an ordinary, if you're a tea lady in the company, management is not going to ask you to say something on behalf of the company, right? Okay, maybe you make the best cup of tea. I don't know, but obviously here I think would refer to someone who is at a fairly senior level. Okay, so I think when it comes to professional ethics, one has to stand firm on such things, because at the end of the day, it also affects your reputation as a member of the management team. So sometimes you have no choice. If you happen to work for a company that is not ethical, you have to make your decision whether you want to be part of this or you think you should just move on. Okay, we all have choices. All right. Whether we want to perform a skillful action or we don't want to perform a skillful action, we do have a choice. Okay. So I think in this case, if you have to, if your boss asks you to say something that is not true and it affects the company, the boss may think it benefits the company, but you know that it also doesn't benefit the shareholders, it doesn't benefit the stakeholders, and it is not true, it affects the public. So would you do it? So it's your choice, it's your call. All right. Okay, it's your call. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Brother Benny. That is all for the Q&A. Thank you for your questions. So once again, thank you very much, Brother Benny, for the timely and wonderful Dhamma sharing. On behalf of BAPS and all participants, I would like to invite all to express our gratitude to Brother Benny by saying sadhu 3 times together. Kindly unmute your microphone and you may turn on your video because we'll be taking a group photo, group screenshot. So let us say sadhu following the ring of the bell. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Cannot see you.
So we have now come to the end of our session. Once again, thank you for your participation and do remember to join us again next week for the 3rd session. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.